Alright, so this is video number 3 in the Netlify Serverless series. Now that we've got the basics out of the way, we've talked about how to connect GitHub and Netlify. We can do continuous deployment with that. We've covered the fundamentals of how Netlify works on our local computer. Now I want to start talking about the cool stuff, the fun stuff, the really powerful stuff that you don't get with something like GitHub Pages, and that is the server-side functions. The ability to set up environment variables, control your environment, and do some actual routing from your site to other sites and other APIs. So let's get into that. Now I've got a GitHub repo set up already, this one right here, and in my project right here, I have a CSS file, JavaScript file, HTML file, and a settings file. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. I've really just got these 3 links, and I'm going to tie these to JavaScript functions, so when I click on each one of them, they're going to be calling different APIs and bringing data back to the page. One of them is going to be somewhere completely unrelated, and I'm going to be calling that from my JavaScript file here in the client side. Another one is going to be just a function, a serverless function that I built, so it's part of my site, but it's on the server side. And then another one I'm going to redirect via the server side and go off and get some data from the GitHub API. All right, so let's jump into this. Settings file. So I've started off with some basic stuff. I'm saying that the root website directory is this directory right here. So this is my entire website. The command, this is the build command. So I talked about that in the previous videos. If you have a command that you want to run, you can just put it right inside of here in your TOML file. This can be any bash script at all. You can have an npm command, whatever it is that you want to do. This is where we'd put it. This is what we do to set up our client-side website. Okay, now I'm going to just connect this with Git. We'll do our git init, and I'll add my Git remote. So this address right here. There we are. So that's set up. Now I'm going to do my Netlify init and tie these two things together. Okay, we connect this directory to an existing Netlify site. No, we don't have one. We're going to create a brand new one. Yes. Use the regular team. My unique name. I'm just going to use the same name that I have here, this Netlify Serverless Demo. And there we go. Your build command. And you can see in brackets here, this is the one that I want to use. Directory to deploy. Again, it's going to be just the current one that we've got defined. There we go. Now it's connecting to GitHub. Okay, now we are ready. We've got everything set up. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this is working the way I expect it. In my JavaScript, I'm going to be using this API, this Ron Swanson quotes API. And every time I click on that link, I'm going to run this function here. We'll do a prevent default to make sure this doesn't run. We're going to make a call to that URL, this one right here, the Ron Swanson quotes one, and bring back the data and write it inside of here. So with what we've done right now, we should be able to just do a Netlify dev and run this on our local machine. There we go. And if we click on this link, it's going to call the JavaScript function. And there we are. Every time we click on this, we're making a call off to that API. But our browser is going to view this as something that's going to a different domain. Our browser is going to look at this as something that it needs to think about CORS. It's a cross-origin request. So maybe we're going to have some issues with that. I want to make this look like it's just something that's built into my site. It's part of the API that I'm building for my website. And to do that, we're going to come over here into our settings file, and we're going to add a new section called redirects. inside of here, we can define where we want to send things. So if a request comes from the server, from the client side, and it is going to, let's say, API, or yeah, we'll do that. We'll do API run this. So any URL that is my local host or whatever the website is up on Netlify, if a request comes in for this, followed by anything else, we're going to redirect that to, and we're going to take this address right here. So I'm going to remove that, bring it over here, and put it inside of here. So anything that starts with this is going to be redirected to this. And then we're going to send back a status code as well, just like that. Now we're going to have to change this to say API ron/quotes. This part right here, the quotes part, this is a unique part of the URL. Over here, it's going to be placed right here, API ron quotes. We want to take that quotes part and put it at the end here. So there's a special character, or not character, but word that we use called splat. :splat will be filled with whatever came after API ron. So let's save that. You can see it's reloading the rules. Over here, I can save this again. Now we'll jump back to the browser. I'm going to refresh this. Click again, and it still works. And if we go into inspect the page, let's go down to the network tab here. We'll run it again. And you can see that this is the URL that my web page is requesting. It looks like it's requesting something that is on my website. It's the same port number, same domain name. So the browser's going to look at that and say, yeah, we're good. There's no need to worry about cores. There's no cross-origin stuff going on here. It's all coming from my website. And it's all because I'm able to control the server-side routing through this settings file. And you can do that with things that are going to any API. You just have to come up with the from and to addresses. All right, so we have that. Next up, how do we make our own functions? So this is great. We can redirect things so it looks like it's part of our website, but how do I actually build my own functions? All right, let's jump in here. And actually, before I do this, I'm going to connect my GitHub repo and upload all this, just so I've got a bit of a history going on. Best practice, you should always do frequent pushes to your repo, frequent commits to your repo. All right, that's the server side brought down. We're up to date that way. Now I'm going to add everything There we go. So on the GitHub repo, refresh that. Oh, sorry, didn't do the push. We did the commit, so we updated our repo locally, but we didn't update it here on the server. There we go. So now we have this live on the server, and over here, if I refresh this, we should see the site. Sure enough, there's the site that we created with our netlify init command. Now we haven't deployed anything yet, but it's ready and waiting. And we're getting a bunch of failed commands here because we haven't deployed yet. We haven't given it the information that it needs. And that's fine. We will be getting to that shortly. All right, now we want to build our own server-side functions that we can test here. I'm just going to minify those to give us some more space. We're going to create a folder in here, and we can call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it func. This is where I'm going to place all my server side, my serverless functions. So if you've ever worked with Express, you know how with Express you've got a framework for a web server, and then you can create your endpoints. So you create your routes, and Express directs them to that. But really, the end of each one of those is just a function. There may be some middleware and stuff, but you've really just got one function that you're calling. And that's the way serverless works. With serverless, the name's a bit misleading. There is still a server. It's just you're not responsible for taking care of it. You don't have to look after updating versions of the server-side software or anything like that. All you're responsible for is your own code base. And the way we do that is the server side, this just becomes a series of functions. Each function is like an endpoint. So whether you're building a website or an API, each function is going to be just an endpoint. So I'm going to create one here called yep. This is my function. Now I can either create it like this, or I can create a folder called yep and put yep.js inside of it. Either way, it's going to be the exact same endpoint. So my endpoint will be starting at the root .netlify/functions/yep. And that is regardless of whether or not I've got a folder called yep that this is inside of. It will both point to this same endpoint. All right, so we're going to get to that in just a second. We have to tell Netlify that this folder right here is where we're putting our server-side stuff. So under the build section, we say functions equals, and then what folder? There it is. Okay. Now we've told Netlify that this location is where our serverless functions are going to sit. Okay, so the file that we're going to create here has got a fairly standard signature. And they're all going to start with, all these serverless functions are going to start with a function that looks like this. And it's going to have 3 arguments passed into it. So we've got the event, the context, and a callback. Now you can call the variables whatever you want, but those are the 3 things being passed in. Event is similar to what you get with Express. So it's similar to the Express request object. So it's going to contain things like the headers, the HTTP method that was used, the path, the IP address, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be inside the event object. If you want to see it when you run it, we can do this console.log event to see that. And the callback, the context is going to be identity information, things like if there's keys and authentication, that kind of thing. That's going to be in the context. And then the callback, this is how we're going to send back our response object. So we're going to say callback, and the first thing is an error object. So if we've got no errors, then we're just going to say null. The second thing is our response object. So null for the errors, and then the response object is going to have things like status code. We're going to say it's a 200 status, and the body, which you want to make sure is JSON. So we call JSON stringify. Even if it's a string, we're going to do this just to make sure that everything we've got is encoded properly. So we'll say, yeah, we'll do something like this. Yep. Okay, so that is the basic structure of one of these serverless functions. So it's a function that's put on the handler property of the exports object, and then that is going to be called because it's inside of this func directory, which is the functions right here. Oh, and I deleted, I had this period inside of here. This is what was causing that build error earlier when we were looking at the deploy. When you upload, if I've got a period, that's working great here. When I'm running Netlify dev, I'm not going to get an error. It's going to run fine here. But when I upload and it tries to do the build, it's going to be taking my current directory. So if I was to do present working directory. This whole path right here, this is what it's going to see as the base directory for doing its builds and everything like that. We don't want that, so we're just going to leave publish as blank. That's what we're going to see inside the settings up on the Netlify website. Okay, so we've got our function, we've got our script. Now this right here, this is the endpoint. Inside here, we're going to set up another redirect in a minute, but let's just test it with the regular one. So we're going to add another function inside of here. We'll just call it get yep or get yes. And we always want to put something here just to make sure that it is running. This is the URL that we're going to use, and we're going to do fetch just like we did up here. So I can actually grab all of that. My lowercase URL, that's the one. Paste all this in here. And we're not getting an array. This one was looking for an array. What we're sending back is really just a string. So we're just going to take that. We could make this into an array, or we could make it into an object. Give it, here, let's give it a property called message. There we go. Now it's an object coming back. We'll save that inside of here. We'll say content, and it's not an array, it's now an object, and we want the message property. Okay, there's the get yes. Now we want to make sure that we're calling it. So yep, right here, that's the ID of the anchor tag that we're going to click in the middle. So when yep gets called, we're going to call the function get yes. That's our function right here. Okay, so get yes is going to do a fetch to Netlify functions yep. All right, we can try our Netlify dev. Test it. There we go. That one's working. Great, and it's got the redirect working from here. So API run, that's the one that's being called. And yep, there we go. That is calling our server-side serverless function that we have inside of here. So let's do a redirect so we can do a little bit nicer version of that URL. Instead of giving away some sort of structure, I'm going to say from, and what do we want to call? This is where we're going to send it. Let's say API/yes. Let's make that the URL. When we call this, we want to route it to that. And these right here, these are numbers. That's why we don't have quotation marks around them. These things are strings, so they do need the quotation marks. And we're calling it API/yes. There is no asterisk at the ends because there's nothing else being passed in. There's no splat here because there was nothing else being passed in. It's just a straight redirect. If you get a request for this, send it to here. That's all we're doing. Okay, so those have been updated. Let's take a look in here. I'm going to look in our console. There's run. There's the yes. Oh, just a typo here. This should be redirects. So our redirect wasn't working because we didn't have that. Okay, I'll clear this out, run this again. There we go, there's the quotes, and there's that one working with the redirect once we spell redirects properly with the S on the end. Okay. Now, environment variables, that's our next step here. I want to, inside of here, use an environment variable. Whenever you're going to deal with anything that's going to be secure, something that you don't want in the code base, like I'm going to take this and I'm going to upload all of this. So this is going to be sitting on my public repo. So we'll do git commit. Git push origin master. There we go. Now that's uploaded. If I was to, inside of this file, have a hard-coded value for some API key or something like that, maybe it's the key that I'm going to use to encrypt a JSON web token, I don't want that inside of here. I want to have something that is in the environment. It's not part of this code base. So to do that, here. Now on the Mac, this is the way we create environment variables. The syntax is slightly different for Windows, but I'm going to create a variable called Steve, and the value is going to be, oh yeah, you betcha. There we go. So I've created an environment variable now. To access it in a serverless script, it's a node script, so we can do this. That's my variable, and then we can do in the console, we can write that out, and then if I wanted to embed it inside of here, we'll use our template strings. There we go. Now I have something that I fetched from the environment. I've written it out in my console, and there it is. So we'll do a Netlify dev here again, run this one more time, and in here, when I refresh this, there it is. There's the value of the environment variable. Now, I'm writing it on my web page. I wouldn't typically do something like that with an environment variable, but that's just proof that it does work. Now, back here, let's refresh this. And here's our latest deploy. There we go. Yeah, that's looking good. And we will open this up. Here we have on the server. I'm just going to look at the console and the network, make sure these are working. Click here. That's running. We click here. That's running. But I don't have the environment variable. So I'm getting this part, but the environment variable is empty. There's no value for that. That's something that I do have to come in here and edit. So we need to come into the settings, and we'll go down to build and deploy, and there's a section for environment. Edit the variables. I'm going to create one. I'm going to call it Steve, and that's going to be the value. I save that. I have now created an environment variable that only people who are allowed to log into the admin panel for this site are going to be allowed to see. Nobody else is going to be able to see the environment variables. It's not in my code base anywhere. Let's do another build. So we're going to upload everything, which is going to force a new deploy. The version that we were looking at on the website before that didn't have the environment variable, it's because we hadn't pushed up that as a build, that version with the build. All right, we'll come back here to deploys. Here's the one right now that's building. So this is what we just pushed up to GitHub. It's being built now. We want to see site is live at the bottom of all this. There's the build command. There we go. Site is live. All right, let's refresh this. That one's working. And there it is. There is our yep function with the environment value being written out as well. And it is nowhere inside of our code base. It is something that we did just through here. Over in settings, build and deploy, environment. So you can create as many of these as you need to. All right. So one last kind of function here. Let's do an API request, but do it from a server-side function. So this is another way that we can avoid CORS type issues. I'm going to have a fetch call that I need to make from my website, but I'm going off to some other API. Now, I can make the call directly from my web page, or I can make a serverless function that acts as a pass-through. So it's going to make the call, get the data from the API, and I'm just going to be making a call from my client-side web page to my serverless function, which is on the same domain, so I should not have any CORS issues whatsoever. All right, we're going to do, where is it here? Inside of main.js, we're going to add another call to another function here. So we're going to do this similar thing to what we did here. And this one is called Octo. And we're going to call the, there it is, get Octo. We're going to call the GitHub API. All right, so we're going to do a fetch call from here, and it's going to go to an endpoint that we have inside of here. Now, I was saying before, you could either put this on its own or put it in a folder. If you need any sort of dependencies, so if there's other node things that you need to use, it's best if you create a folder. So I'm going to create a folder here. We'll call it Octo. Inside of that, I'm going to create my file, octo.js. This is going to be similar to what we did here. It's going to start off the same way. Here, let's copy the first 3 lines here. So this is going to be the endpoint. Inside this function, I've got those same 3 things, and I want to call callback. But before I can do that, I need to make a request. I need to send a fetch call from here off to that GitHub API. You know, maybe I've got my URL, and it's going to be there we go. I'm just going to make a public request with the public part of the API to get all of the public repos that are owned by AutoCAD. Okay, we're going to get that. Now to do this, I need to be able to call fetch. Now Node does not have a native fetch command yet. So what I need to do is I need to get that. We have to do something like this. We have to say fetch require node fetch. Okay, but I don't have that yet. So what we're going to do is we are going to actually turn this Octo folder into its own little npm repository. We're going to put the dependency inside of here. So let's cd into, actually we'll do it on a new tab. We'll cd into func/octo. So we're inside of this Octo folder now, and we're going to do an npm init, just like that, and then an npm install of node fetch. And we're doing it locally inside of here. So there's the node modules. Here's the package JSON file. And right here at the bottom, there's the dependency. So this is how we connect node dependencies to functions that we're building. So it's in my package.json file, which means I can now do the require, and now I can actually do fetch. And let's turn this into an async function. So I can say let response equals fetch URL, and we're going to await that, and let our data equal await res.json. Okay, and that's going to be the data that's coming back from that call. All right, we have that. Now we can do our response, our callback. Now I'm not doing any error checking or anything here. I'm really keeping this quite simple just to be able to get through it quickly. Okay, so we've brought in a dependency. Our package.json listed it as a dependency. We installed it, so it's here. Our octo.js file, this is the current endpoint for it. We do the fetch, we get the data, and then we do our callback, and we send the body back to whoever is making a call to this endpoint. If we want to call this something else, again, we come over here, we'll create another redirects. Make sure you put the S on the end. So from, and we're going to call it API Octo. You can call it whatever you like, but that's what this one's going to be called. Saved. Okay. So from our JavaScript file, I can now call this endpoint. It's going to call my Octo script, and it is going to make sure that fetch has been installed. That's going to be part of the build process. When we update our GitHub repo and then Netlify goes over and brings that down, it's going to look in that folder and say, hey, you've got a requirement here. You've got a package.json inside of your functions. I'm going to install that for you so that I have it the next time you need to run this. So it will do that for us. There we go. And I'm pretty sure that this is an array that comes back. So inside of there, I'm going to get the main element, just like we did for the other ones. I'm going to change the H2s to a UL, and we're going to put our li inside of here. We're going to create a variable called content, and that's going to take data, and we'll do a map function, and for each one of those items inside of this record set that's coming back, this data array, we are going to come in here and we will return an li tag for each one of them, just like that. So we're creating an array of LIs to put inside the UL, and inside of here, if memory serves, it's item.name. That's the property we want. That's just going to be the name of the repo. So we're going to get a list of repos written out inside of here. All right, so let's try this out. We can do Netlify dev to test it locally. And if that works, we'll send it all up to GitHub. And of course, this is not going to work because we're inside that Octo folder. I was on the wrong terminal here. So let's delete this terminal, go back to the first one. There we go. Now try that again. Netlify dev. There we go. Come back and refresh this. There we go. Now we've got our site here. And Ron Swanson works, and the yep works with our environment variable. And Octocat. Yep, there's the response. So why are we not getting anything coming back here? Oh, yes, of course, right here. JSON is a method, not a property. So we'll save that, clear this out, refresh. Ron's good, yep's good, Octocat. There we go. So we have a list of repo names owned by Octocat. Great. So that's working here. Let's kill this and push it up. There we go. Now back to our deploys. We'll refresh this and we should see one that's building. There it is. So we'll just have to wait a moment while that builds. So you can see in our function directory, it was preparing those two scripts, so they're ready to go. Site is live. Refresh. Ron is working with the redirect. Yep is working with the redirect and the environment variable, and Octocat is working as well. All right, so there's a variety of different endpoints, redirects, serverless, environment variables, all kinds of stuff there. There's a ton of information. And don't forget to go and check out the documentation for all these things. I've got a whole bunch of links to different documentation down inside the description, as well as a link to the repo. So if you want to just grab a copy of that, you can, and start playing around with it. So I hope that helps you out. I hope you really start to have fun with working with Netlify and serverless. And as always, thanks for watching.